You ever wondered why the kindest people, the ones who open their hearts, who speak gently, who remember your birthday when the world forgets, always seem to end up by themselves? I'll tell you why. It's because they live in a world that doesn't understand them. You see, kind people, nice people, they carry a burden. They walk through life giving pieces of themselves to others, expecting nothing in return. They forgive quickly, love deeply, and care relentlessly. But the world is built on noise, and their silence is misunderstood. They are not weak, no, quite the opposite. It takes enormous strength to stay soft in a world that rewards hardness. It takes courage to be kind when cruelty is easier. But here's the painful truth. Most people only notice kind souls when they need them. Once the fire is lit and their own hands are warm, they walk away. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just gone, and the nice person is left sitting in the ashes, wondering what they did wrong. But let me tell you something. You didn't do anything wrong. You were simply too real in a world that trades in masks. You stayed when others left. You listened when they spoke. You remembered the little things. That kind of presence, it scares people, because being deeply seen makes others uncomfortable. And kindness, genuine kindness, feels foreign to those who have never healed. So the nice ones end up alone. But not because they're unlovable. No, because they loved too many who couldn't handle love. They saw beauty in the broken and tried to heal what they didn't break. They filled rooms with warmth and received coldness in return. And every time they were left behind, they blamed themselves. But the truth is that people don't abandon nice souls because they're not enough. They leave because they're too much, too honest, too giving, too open. But here's what I want you to remember. There's a certain sacredness in solitude. There's a quiet nobility in choosing to remain kind in a world that mistreats you. Don't let loneliness make you hollow. Let it make you whole. You are not alone because something is wrong with you. You are alone because this world does not yet know how to treasure hearts like yours. And until it learns, walk with dignity. Love yourself with the same sincerity you give others. And never, ever stop being kind, because one day, when the noise fades and the masks fall, your silence, your depth, your authenticity, it will echo. And someone will find you, not because they need saving, but because they recognize the quiet power of a soul that never gave up on love. They say hate is loud, but discomfort, that's quieter. It walks away without a sound. It avoids eye contact. It forgets to reply. It disappears before it ever confronts the truth. Most people don't hate you. They simply can't handle what you represent. You bring presence. And presence, real presence, is unnerving to someone who has lived a life of emotional absence. You ask questions that require honesty. You offer silence that demands reflection. You don't perform, you simply are. And that rattles the ones who have grown used to masks. You don't just listen, you hear. You don't just look, you see. And that level of depth feels like drowning to someone who has only ever learned how to float. They don't hate you. They fear what you bring out in them. You bring out the unhealed, the forgotten, the buried, your kindness, your attention, your stillness. It unearths things they've long tried to suppress. Most people don't want to be seen, not truly, because being seen means being known. And being known means being vulnerable. There's no manual for how to deal with someone like you. You don't play the usual games. You don't manipulate. You don't pretend. You care, and you say so. You hurt, and you admit it. That kind of honesty feels dangerous to the guarded. You exist like a mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that reflects, the one that says, "This is you, as you are." And most people aren't ready for that. They prefer dim lighting and flattering angles. They crave illusions, not truth. So when they start pulling away, when they ghost, when they slowly vanish from your life, it's not always rejection. Sometimes it's retreat. Retreat from the discomfort of having to face themselves, because when you show up real, you reveal what they are not, and that's hard to swallow. You become a reminder a gentle, unspoken reminder of what they've never allowed themselves to be: soft, sincere, unfiltered. Not everyone is ready to evolve, and standing next to someone who has, it makes them feel behind. They may tell themselves you were too intense, too emotional, too much, but that's only their way of shrinking what they couldn't hold. It's easier to call fire dangerous than to admit you were never taught how to handle warmth. You'll replay the conversations in your mind, you'll wonder what you said, what you did, but there will be no answer that satisfies the ache. Because it was never about your wrongness, it was about their unreadiness. Don't internalize what others project. You are not their fear. You are not their wound. You are not the echo of their past pain. You are simply a soul that refused to stay shallow, and in a world of surface-level interaction that makes you rare. Rare things are often misunderstood, and what is misunderstood is usually feared until it is needed, until it is missed, until it is gone. So no, they don't hate you. They just couldn't handle the storm that comes with true connection. They couldn't hold the weight of depth in their trembling hands. And instead of growing stronger, they let go. But it's not your job to shrink, not your role to become easier to hold. You were meant to be full. You were meant to stir the soul. You were meant to awaken, not comfort. You were never the problem. You were the test. There's a whisper that follows people like you. It doesn't shout. It's not obvious, but it's always there. And the way people shift uncomfortably when you speak the truth, in how they hesitate when your presence demands more than performance. You've been told you're too much, but that was never the truth. The truth is, you're just too real. You walk into a room and the atmosphere changes, not because you're loud, but because your energy carries weight. You don't float, you anchor, you hold space, you bring something that can't be faked. Genuineness, that raw, unpolished, sometimes inconvenient form of sincerity, and that's not easy to digest for most. They've grown used to watered-down versions of everything, filtered words, delicate lies, smiles that never reach the eyes. But you arrive unfiltered. You cry when you're moved. You speak when it matters. You laugh deeply, love fully, ache without apology, and so they label it too much. It's easier to dismiss intensity than to confront shallowness. It's easier to call you dramatic than to admit they've been emotionally absent for years. You threaten their comfort zones not with violence but with presence, with truth. When you speak, people feel seen, and being seen is uncomfortable when you've spent your whole life hiding. You don't let conversations stay on the surface. You ask real questions, you listen for real answers, and people don't always want to go that deep. Not because they don't care, but because they're afraid of what they'll find. You've been made to feel like you need to apologize. For feeling too strongly, for loving too loudly, for dreaming too vividly. But let me tell you, those aren't flaws. Those are signals of life. You are not a burden. You are a mirror that reflects everything this world is trying to numb. People fear real. Real breaks illusions. Real cracks the shell. Real confronts the masks we all wear. And when someone comes along and refuses to pretend, it unsettles the actors, so they pull away, they call you names. Overly emotional, too deep, hard to please, not because you are any of those things, but because they can't give you what you deserve, and rather than admit that, they try to redefine you. But don't let the world convince you that silence is strength and apathy is wisdom. Your heart is not a weakness. Your passion is not a fault. You are the color in a grayscale existence, the thunder in a world that prefers whispers. The truth is, most people aren't ready for someone who refuses to perform. They want convenience, not connection. They want comfort, not growth. And you, in all your unfiltered reality, challenge them to grow. That's uncomfortable. That's rare. You don't fit into small places. You don't belong in shallow waters. You were never made to dim. You were never meant to edit yourself just to be digestible. You are not a version of yourself. You are the whole, complex, intense, beautiful truth. So when they say you're too much, hear what they're really saying. You're reminding me of everything I've tried to forget. when they say, "You're too intense. Understand, I don't know how to meet you at that depth." And when they walk away, realize, this journey wasn't meant to be shared with someone not ready to face the truth. You weren't born to be tolerable, you were born to be transformative, and transformation is messy. It's loud, it's painful, but it's real, and real is what this world desperately needs, even if it doesn't always know how to receive it. So stay real, stay unedited, stay whole, even if it means walking alone through rooms full of masks. Because one day, someone will enter who looks at you and says, finally, someone who doesn't make me feel like I have to hide. There's a quiet kind of strength in kindness, the kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand applause, doesn't come dressed in armor. It shows up gently, it holds the door, it remembers your name, it stays a little longer when everyone else has left. But strangely, kindness, real, enduring kindness, is often misunderstood. People think it's softness. They think it's naivety, that you are being kind because you haven't seen the world for what it really is, as if kindness only grows in ignorance and bitterness is born from wisdom, but they are wrong. The kindest souls are not the ones untouched by pain. They are the ones who touched pain, held it, and still chose to be good. You give, not because you have plenty, but because you remember what it was like to have nothing. You forgive, not because you're weak, but because you know carrying resentment only keeps you in chains. You speak gently, not because you don't know how to raise your voice, but because you've seen what yelling does to a heart. But they don't see that, not at first. They see the smile and assume you've never bled. They see the patience and mistake it for permission. They see the empathy and think, this one won't leave, this one will always understand. And so they test it. They take, slowly at first, a favor here, a burden there. They ask for time and you give it. They forget to say thank you and you let it go. They disappoint you and you forgive, not because you don't notice, but because you choose not to make someone feel smaller. You choose peace over pride, and then, one day, it goes too far. They break something in you they didn't think could break. They push you to the edge of your own goodness, assuming there's still more to give. And when they find silence where there was once softness, they panic, because that's when they realize your kindness wasn't a resource. It was a choice, a deliberate, often difficult, and deeply courageous choice. And now that it's gone, they feel the cold they never noticed when you were warm. They start to remember the things you did, the check-ins, the sacrifices, the quiet support, all the little efforts that never asked for attention. Now it all feels like absence, but you were always there. They just never learned how to see you. Kindness is never weakness. Weakness is reactive. Weakness is loud. Weakness needs validation. Kindness is something else. It is strength tempered by understanding. It is power that chooses not to dominate. It is resilience cloaked in grace. It takes strength to stay soft in a world that sharpens people like knives. It takes resolve to continue to love people who have forgotten how to love themselves. And you did all of that, not because you were trying to be a saint, but because that's who you are when no one's watching. But you're not infinite, and that's what they forget. Even kindness needs rest. Even light needs time to recharge. You are not obligated to keep pouring from a vessel that others only take from. You are not required to be their comfort while they become your chaos. So when your kindness disappears, when the calls go unanswered, when the silence stretches longer, when the patience is no longer present, it's not revenge, it's revelation. It's you stepping away from a place that never honored your heart. And in that absence, they finally feel the weight of what you carried, the way you steadied the room, the way your warmth made things feel safe, and suddenly your kindness is remembered, not assumed. It's craved, not dismissed, but by then you've learned, you've grown, you've seen that being kind does not mean being available to everyone, that your heart deserves rest, that boundaries are the language of self-respect, not punishment. So let them call it weakness, let them misunderstand, because one day they'll know They'll feel the cold and realize where the warmth once came from. And by then, you'll be somewhere else, still kind, still whole, but no longer emptying yourself for those who never said thank you. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream. It doesn't shatter windows or draw attention. It sits in silence and watches as your love, the most sacred part of you, is misunderstood, mishandled, or worse, met with indifference. Because what no one tells you is that you can give love purely, and it still won't be enough for someone who isn't ready to receive it. You gave yourself fully, not just in grand gestures, but in the quiet ways that no one else noticed. You listened when no one else would. You remembered the little things. You made room for them in your future without needing them to ask. And somewhere inside you, you believed that this kind of love, your kind of love, would be enough to open their eyes. But love is not a hammer. It cannot force open a heart that's welded shut. Some people wear their wounds like armor. They've learned to fear what should feel safe. They've convinced themselves that love always ends in loss, so they sabotage it before it can bloom. And in their chaos, you mistook brokenness for depth. You thought that if you just loved them harder, longer, more patiently, they would heal, that your consistency would calm their storms, that your tenderness would teach them they were worthy. But love doesn't always fix people. Sometimes it only shows them what they're not ready to face, and so they pulled away, not because you weren't enough, but because your presence demanded honesty. Your love required them to stand still and be seen. And some people have spent their whole lives running from mirrors. They prefer the chase, they crave the drama, they're addicted to the uncertainty, because it gives them permission to avoid the stillness that love brings. You loved someone who thought they were unlovable, and instead of letting that love heal them, they rejected it, not out of malice, but out of fear. Because when someone believes they are broken beyond repair, real love terrifies them. It threatens the story they've been telling themselves for years, and in return you felt small. You questioned your worth. You asked yourself why your love wasn't enough. But you need to understand this. Your love was never the problem. Their capacity was. You gave them a feast, and they came with an empty stomach, but no intention to eat. They weren't hungry for connection. They were only curious. Curious about what it would feel like to be loved without condition, even if just for a moment. And when it got too real, too raw, too revealing, they ran, or worse, they stayed but withdrew. They let you keep giving while they stopped showing up. You tried harder, you stayed longer, and the deeper you loved, the more invisible you became. Until one day you realized, this isn't love, this is self-abandonment disguised as devotion. Still, you blamed yourself, you replayed the conversations, you wondered what you could have done differently. But there is no version of you, no softer, quieter, more understanding version, that would have been right for someone who was committed to not choosing love. You are not responsible for their healing. You are not the antidote to someone else's emotional neglect. You can be the light, but you cannot drag someone out of their own darkness if they have grown comfortable there. You are not their savior. You are not their therapist. You are a human being who deserves to be met with the same depth you offer. And yet your love wasn't wasted, because every time you chose to show up with your heart wide open, you proved that love like yours still exists. It was not received by the person you gave it to, but it left a mark. Somewhere deep inside them, your love planted a seed. It may never bloom where you can see it, but that does not make it meaningless. You taught them something, that not all love is transactional, that some love is real. That some people still choose tenderness even when it isn't returned, and one day, perhaps long after you've gone, they'll remember you, not with guilt, but with gravity. They'll remember what it felt like to be loved that way, even if they couldn't hold on to it. But your path doesn't end in their memory. You are still here, still loving, still whole, and there are people, rare, real people, who are not only capable of receiving that love, but aching to return it. People who won't need you to prove your worth, people who won't mistake your depth for danger, people who will say, finally, someone who loves like I do, you loved someone who wasn't ready, that's not your failure. That's a moment in your story, and now you move forward, not smaller, not harder, not colder, but wiser, still soft, still open, but no longer pouring into hands that will only let it slip through. There is a moment, quiet, heavy, undeniable, when you realize that staying is no longer an act of love, but an act of self-neglect. You've tried. My God, you've tried. You held on through storms that weren't yours to weather. You made excuses, softened truths, told yourself that love meant endurance. But there comes a point when holding on starts to harm more than it heals. Letting go isn't always a decision. Sometimes it's a surrender, a quiet exhale after too many held breaths, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally seen the truth. Love is not enough when it's not returned. Effort doesn't fix everything. Wanting more for someone doesn't make them ready to receive it. You tell yourself stories. That may be if you're more patient, more understanding, that if you just hang in there a little longer, they'll change, that love will finally be enough to bring them back, to soften the cold, to open the door they keep shutting. But it doesn't work that way. You can't carry the weight of a connection alone. There is grace in letting go, not the kind the world celebrates, but the kind that demands quiet courage. It's choosing to walk away not in anger, but in reverence, because you loved them truly, and now you love yourself enough to stop shrinking for someone else's comfort. You start to see the signs you once ignored, the empty promises, the absence wrapped in excuses. The way your voice started to echo in conversations that used to feel alive, and you realize you've been waiting for someone who made peace with your presence but stopped reaching for your heart. So you begin to release. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gently. You stop checking your phone. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop searching their words for signs of hope. You stop giving chances to someone who never saw them as gifts. It's painful. It tears something in you, because love didn't die. It just stopped being mutual. You still care. You still remember the good moments. But memory is not reason enough to stay where you're no longer seen. Nostalgia isn't love, it's a ghost. And you can't build a life with someone who only exists in the past. Letting go doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you choose to protect that love, to give it back to yourself, to save what's sacred about you from being wasted in a place it's no longer welcomed. It means you no longer accept crumbs when you're capable of giving and receiving a full feast. Some people teach you love. Others teach you limits. And then there are those rare few who teach you both at once. And you met someone who showed you what it's like to care deeply, to give fully, and in doing so, showed you the price of never being met halfway. You mourn even when it's your choice. You grieve a future that felt possible. But eventually, the sadness becomes clarity, the tears become release, and in the space they left behind, something powerful grows. The reminder that love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. You start to remember who you were before you bent so far. You reclaim the parts of yourself you gave away, the laughter, the dreams, the light that dimmed under the weight of trying to make it work. And in that rediscovery, you find something unexpected: peace. People will ask why you left if you still loved them, and you'll say, because I love myself too, because love should not feel like begging. Because the right love doesn't make you question your worth. Because choosing yourself is not betrayal, it's survival. Letting go is not the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect. It's the final act of faith in a story that had no more pages. It's standing at the edge and saying, I gave all I could. And now I walk away not because I stopped loving, but because I started listening to the silence. And in that silence, you'll hear something beautiful. You'll hear yourself coming back, stronger, softer, wiser, still capable of loving, but no longer willing to bleed for it, still open, but no longer unguarded, still kind, but no longer naive. And one day, you'll meet someone who speaks the same language as your heart, who doesn't need to be convinced to stay, who doesn't flinch at your love, who sees your value without needing to be taught how to treat it. But until then, you walk away, not as a victim, not as a fool, but as someone brave enough to let go of what was never fully yours. There comes a moment, perhaps not loud, perhaps not even visible to others, when a kind soul, one who has given endlessly, loved deeply, and stayed longer than most, looks at their own reflection and finally sees the cost of their softness. It is not bitterness they find, but a quiet kind of wisdom. They begin to understand that solitude was never the punishment. It was the process, a necessary unfolding of truth that required their loneliness to bring clarity. The world doesn't always reward tenderness with tenderness. The ones who show up consistently, who love selflessly, who offer gentleness in a time that glorifies detachment. These are the ones often left standing alone when the room clears out. But it is in that space, in the aftermath of love unreturned, that the true character of a person is revealed. And for the genuinely kind, that character remains unshaken, even in heartbreak. Being alone isn't always the result of being unwanted. Sometimes it's the inevitable consequence of being authentic in a world that hasn't learned to value what isn't packaged with conditions. You weren't left behind because you lacked value. You were left because your value required depth, and not everyone is willing to swim that deep. Nice people, real nice people, are often not nice because it's easy. They are kind because they know the opposite too well. They felt the coldness of being misunderstood, ignored, used, and instead of becoming what hurt them, they chose the harder path. To remain open, to remain loving, to remain human in a world addicted to armor, but kindness, when unprotected, gets mistaken for weakness. Empathy, when overextended, becomes exhaustion, and love, when one-sided, begins to resemble sacrifice. That is where many find themselves, tired, confused, wondering how something as sacred as kindness could lead to so much silence in return. There is pain in being the one who always listens, yet goes unheard. The one who always makes room, yet feels displaced. The one who shows up, even when no one calls, and yet disappears when it's their turn to be seen. But there is also power in it. Because what you learn in the silence of your own company is that your value was never dependent on the way others received you. You begin to see that not everyone can carry the weight of sincerity. Not everyone is ready for the honesty you bring. Some prefer the comfort of shallow waters. They're not bad, they're not cruel, they're simply not prepared, and perhaps that's the cruelest truth. You can be someone's blessing long before they are someone's answer. But you are not alone because you are broken. You are not isolated because something is wrong with you. You are alone because the space you inhabit requires people to meet you with truth, with effort, with care. And those kinds of souls are rare, not impossible, but rare. So until they arrive, your solitude is not a void, it's a filter. You stop giving to be chosen. You stop loving to be seen. You start to love because it is who you are, not a transaction. And in that shift, everything begins to change. The loneliness remains, yes, but it softens. It transforms from emptiness to sacred ground, a place where healing happens, where growth unfolds, where self-respect finally roots itself. The world tells you to harden, to protect yourself, to give less. But you know better now. Kindness is not the enemy. Blindness is. Self-neglect is. The belief that you must earn what should be given freely. That's what must be unlearned. You start to understand that protecting your peace doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming clear. So you begin to choose differently. You begin to see red flags without painting them white. You begin to walk away without waiting for the final wound. You begin to say no, not because you don't care, but because you finally care about yourself too. You become someone who still loves deeply, but no longer abandons themselves to do it. And as time passes, solitude becomes strength. You no longer dread the silence. You begin to hear yourself again. You dream again. You laugh not to prove anything, but because your soul is learning to breathe without permission. You aren't waiting for anyone to complete you. You've remembered that you were never incomplete. Then, one day, someone may come along. Someone who recognizes your heart, not as a challenge to conquer, but as a sanctuary to honor. Someone who sees the depth, not as danger, but as invitation. And if they don't, you remain whole, because the most beautiful thing about nice people is that they learn to choose themselves, even when the world forgets to. So if you find yourself alone, understand it's not because your love failed. It's because your love is rare, and rare things take time to be found. You are not forgotten. You are simply preparing for the day when someone will meet your kindness with reverence, not resistance. And until that day, may you hold your own hand with the same tenderness you offered others, because being alone is not the end of your story. It is the sacred beginning of the chapter where you finally return home to yourself.